Hello. If you've watched Robert Eggers' Nosferatu and you're still lingering in that world of creeping dread, historical texture and suffocating inevitability, I have the film you should watch next. It's smaller, stranger, quieter, but it shares the same dark philosophy. The film is The Vourdalak, and if Nosferatu worked on you not just as a horror film but as something older, something that felt unearthed rather than invented, then this is the perfect companion piece. Because both films treat the vampire not as fantasy, but as something rooted in real historical fear about disease, about family, about corruption. In both cases, vampirism feels less like a genre invention and more like a force people once genuinely believed in. On the surface, the pairing might seem unexpected. Eggers' Nosferatu is grand and operatic, sweeping Gothic architecture, plague-stricken streets, a sense of doom that feels almost biblical in scale. The Vourdalak is intimate, rural, contained largely within a wooden house at the edge of the world. But both films return the vampire to something modern cinema often forgets. Not seduction, not romance, not stylish anti-heroism. There's no Edward Cullen or Lestat here, no shade on those movies. But both films return to folklore. And folklore isn't about glamour, it's about warnings. The Vourdalak is based on an 1839 novella by Alexei Tolstoy, the second cousin of Leo Tolstoy, trivia fans. And it's one of the earliest literary explorations of vampirism in Eastern Europe. The story follows a French nobleman who seeks shelter in a rural Slavic family. They're waiting for their patriarch, Gorcha, who left to hunt a bandit and gave them a strict warning. If he returns after 6 days, do not let him in, because if he comes back late, he will not be the same man. No spoilers, that's the premise. And immediately you can feel the thematic overlap with Nosferatu. Both films revolve around the return of something that really should have stayed buried. But what makes this pairing so compelling isn't just the shared candlelight and shadows, it's the shared seriousness. Neither film treats vampirism as camp, neither modernizes it into metaphor for teenage rebellion or romantic longing. Instead, both ask, what if these old beliefs existed for a reason? What if the vampire is not just a monster, but a cultural expression of very real anxieties. Anxieties about contagion, inheritance, obligation, and decay. And this becomes especially powerful when you look at how both films connect vampirism to love. One of the most fascinating connections between Nosferatu and the Vourdalak is how they link vampirism to intimacy, but in completely different ways. In the Vourdalak, the central anxiety is misrecognition. The family knows the rule. They know the warning. If their patriarch returns after 6 days, they must not let him in. And yet, when he does return, certainty begins to fracture. Is it really him? Has he truly changed? How can you deny your own father? The horror grows from hesitation, from emotional attachment overriding instinct. Love becomes a vulnerability. It clouds judgment. It makes the unthinkable negotiable. The question the film asks is deeply uncomfortable. What happens when the monster wears a familiar face and you want it to be real so badly that you ignore what you see? In that sense, vampirism becomes a test of loyalty or of denial, of how far familial obligation can stretch before it breaks. But Nosferatu approaches love from the opposite direction. Ellen isn't blind to to Orlok. She senses him before anyone else does. She understands what he is. There's no comforting ambiguity in her arc. If anything, she sees too clearly, and that's what makes her story tragic. In Nosferatu, love isn't a weakness that blinds, it's a strength that demands sacrifice. Ellen understands that Orlok cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or outwitted. The only way to stop him is to confront him directly, to draw him in and endure him. So where the Vourdalak is about the danger of refusing to recognize the monster, Nosferatu is about the burden of recognizing it and choosing to face it anyway. One story asks, what if love makes you ignore the warning? The other asks, what if love compels you to answer it? That contrast is powerful. In both films, vampirism enters through intimacy, through the family, the home, but the emotional mechanics are different. In the Vourdalak, affection delays action, and that delay is fatal. In Nosferatu, affection becomes resolve, and that resolve is devastating. Both films treat the vampire as a force that destabilizes the most sacred human bond, but one frames love as blindness, the other frames it as sacrifice. That distinction makes them not just aesthetically similar, but philosophically complementary. There's also a shared fatalism running through both stories. In Nosferatu, everything feels preordained. The atmosphere is suffocating because events feel inevitable, long before the characters fully grasp them. The Vourdalak carries a quieter version of that inevitability. Once the 6-day rule is broken, the clock begins ticking. Every passing moment carries dread. The film doesn't rely on jump scares or spectacle, it relies on anticipation. And anticipation is where folklore lives. Folk tales aren't about shocking twists, they're about warnings given in advance. They tell you what will happen and they ask, will you listen? Stylistically, the films complement each other while revealing their differences. Nosferatu feels monumental. It's like a gothic symphony. Every frame is sculpted and the dread builds in waves. The Vourdalak feels more handcrafted, intimate. It's almost theatrical in its performances and its pacing. The horror unfolds in glances, in pauses, in the quiet tension between family members. And that intimacy makes it uniquely unsettling because when horror shrinks to the size of a single household, there's nowhere to escape. So who is the Vourdalak for? It's for viewers who want vampires to feel wrong again, to feel ancient, dangerous, unromantic. It's for people who appreciate horror that respects folklore instead of reinventing it into something fashionable. It's for anyone who left Nosferatu wanting more stories that treat myth not as aesthetic decoration, but as moral architecture. If Nosferatu left you craving horror that feels excavated from history, horror that understands evil as something older than modern psychology, then the Vourdalak should be your next step. Not because it imitates Egger's film, but because it stands beside it. Two stories from different traditions, two versions of vampirism rooted in belief, both suggesting that the past isn't dead, that superstition isn't foolishness, and that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't the monster outside your home, it's the one asking to be let in. That's the kind of horror that lingers with you. The Vourdalak is absolutely worth your time. Enjoy the movie.